Welcome to the Living HopeCast. Ready to dive deep into another fascinating message?
Absolutely.
Today we're looking at Beyond the Twinkling Lights.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, it was presented by Jeremy Payton at Living Hope Community Church on Sunday, March 16th. If you want to see the full thing, the full context, we've got a link to the complete video recording in the description of this deep dive.
You can find it a few places too, right?
Oh yeah, you can find it on the Living Hope webpage, YouTube, Facebook, and their church app.
Lots of ways to check it out.
Yeah, we really encourage you to explore the whole message. But
we're going to cover a lot of the good stuff here.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to hit the high points in this deep dive. We're really focusing on what happens after death.
Big questions.
Yeah, huge questions. And, Jeremy's message is really focused on 1 Corinthians chapter 15.
Right.
Which is kind of a key text for that topic.
It is. It really is.
And we're going to explore how this message tackles some, deeply rooted ideas about the afterlife.
Some that go way back.
Yeah, some ancient stuff and some surprisingly really modern ideas.
Definitely.
So where did this message really grab you?
Well, I think that starting analogy, about trying to explain death to a child, that is incredibly insightful. I mean, it just immediately puts us in a place we can all relate to.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Like that awkwardness, that feeling of not really knowing how to articulate something so fundamental.
Totally.
And then that story, about the child in the choir, and they just totally lose their enthusiasm for meeting the king after seeing a casket.
Oh, right.
It just speaks volumes about how jarring it is to encounter death.
Even the intellectual giants were trying to figure out, what happens after you die.
And sometimes coming to some pretty strange conclusions.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Corinth was this vibrant hub of philosophical discourse, right? And then, when the early Christians showed up with this message of Jesus,
yeah,
it was bound to clash with the existing worldviews.
Yeah.
And people tried to synthesize the new ideas with what they already believed, which led to some interesting deviations.
For sure.
Especially around the whole concept of resurrection.
Yeah, and that brings us to the absolute bedrock of Christian belief.
The resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, which Paul lays out so clearly in 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah, and the message really emphasizes that, if that didn't happen, the whole thing kind of falls apart.
It does. The whole framework of faith just collapses.
Yeah.
And that's the core of Paul's argument. As the message points out, if Christ hasn't been raised, then our preaching is pointless, right?
And your faith as you hold it, also pointless.
Mm-hmm.
And the implications kind of ripple outwards.
Yeah.
It affects how we understand sin, forgiveness, and, most importantly for our discussion today, the hope we have for the future.
Absolutely. And it's that future hope that leads us to this really common perspective on death, both then and now.
The lights out theory.
Yeah. 1 minute you're here, the next, nothing. End of story.
And what I find fascinating is how the message uses humor.
Oh, yeah, like the comedians.
Yeah, those clips from the comedians.
Yeah.
To kind of gently expose the contradictions in that purely materialistic view.
Yeah.
The idea that something comes from nothing and then goes back to nothing, it raises some pretty serious questions, doesn't it?
It does.
Philosophically speaking, it just doesn't quite add up.
Yeah, Pete Holmes' bit about Dairy Queen, being closed and then Jesus showing up with the blizzard. It's just this simple but effective way to illustrate how one piece of evidence can just shatter a belief.
And in this case, the resurrection of Jesus is that undeniable disruption to that lights out idea.
Exactly. It's like the elephant in the room for that theory. If there's even one credible example of somebody actually dying and coming back to life, somebody who's not lying or hallucinating,
right,
then the whole idea of complete non-existence after death just doesn't hold water.
It doesn't. But instead of just accepting that testimony, the Corinthians, kind of like people today, started asking really specific questions.
Right. Okay, but how does this actually work?
Yeah. And that takes us to 1 Corinthians 15.35.
How are the dead raised? What kind of body will they have when they come?
Which are natural questions.
Totally.
People have always wondered, what resurrected life would actually be like. But Paul's initial response, you fool.
Yeah, that's a little harsh, isn't it? At least to our modern ears.
It is. It kind of makes you sit up and pay attention.
Yeah.
But the message clarifies that, he's not calling them stupid. It's more about their insistence on understanding, like, spiritual things through a purely human lens.
Instead of accepting what God has actually revealed.
Yeah.
That's really key here. He's not shutting down their questions, but he is challenging their way of thinking.
Yeah.
They're trying to fit this future heavenly existence into the box of their earthly experience.
Right.
And they just don't have the tools for that.
They don't. And so to help them and us grasp this, Paul uses some really vivid metaphors.
Like the seed.
Yeah.
You plant it, it looks like it dies, but then something completely different comes up.
Right. The seed doesn't look like the final plant at all.
Such a powerful image. It speaks to the idea of transformation.
Yeah.
You know, our current bodies are like that seed. They're planted, but what comes out in the resurrection is going to be new, fundamentally changed, but still connected to what was there before.
I love that. Yeah, and then he expands on that with the analogy of different kinds of flesh, right? Like humans, animals, birds, fish. They're all flesh, but they're also different.
Right. And it just highlights that there isn't just one kind of physical existence. I mean, God's creation is so diverse. There's this vast array of earthly bodies, each perfectly suited for its purpose and its environment.
Right.
And that suggests that there will also be different kinds of heavenly bodies.
Absolutely.
Distinct from our current form, maybe equally suited for their new reality.
That's amazing to think about. And finally, he points to the celestial realm.
Right. Heavenly bodies, earthly bodies. The sun, moon, stars. Even the stars vary in brightness.
Yeah, it really brings home the scale and variety of the cosmos.
And what's really fascinating is how the message connects this to our limited perspective.
Like when you look up at the night sky.
You see all those twinkling lights. And from down here, they all look kind of similar. But modern astronomy has revealed that there's this incredible diversity among those celestial objects. We just can't fully appreciate it from down here.
Right. The message calls us terra chauvinists.
Love that.
Which basically means that we overvalue and generalize from our earthly experience.
We assume everything in the universe works the same way as it does on our little planet.
Yeah, like we live on a rock, so we think everything else is just a variation of a rock.
Right, but it's so much more diverse than that.
Yeah, comparing Earth to like gas giants and ice giants, and then our sun to a star like Betelgeuse. It's mind-blowing.
It is. It really recalibrates our sense of scale and perspective.
Totally. And I think it really illustrates Paul's point. Our earthly perspective, our limited senses, our inability to create something that lives after death.
Yeah.
It all points to the fact that we just can't fully grasp the nature of our resurrected bodies.
We're trying to understand something divine using, human tools.
And that leads to the message's emphasis on humility. We just don't have the authority to say definitively what happens after death. Like, we haven't experienced it.
Right. It's like that analogy in the message. The pain of a cactus prick compared to childbirth. Someone can talk all they want about childbirth, but unless they've experienced it, their understanding is limited.
It's a great analogy. And the Corinthians, in trying to define resurrected life based on their earthly understanding, they were kind of doing the same thing.
Exactly. They were making pronouncements about the afterlife without the authority of divine revelation.
Which brings us to the philosophical ideas of the time, particularly Plato's idea of the preexistence of the soul.
Oh, right.
And the message points out that Paul directly addresses this in 1 Corinthians 15.46. He says the natural came first, then the spiritual.
Yeah, a very clear distinction. Plato thought the soul existed in this realm of perfect forms before entering a physical body.
Right.
Paul is saying the opposite. Adam, the first man, was from the earth. Christ, the second Adam, is the life-giving spirit.
And the message emphasizes that while Plato was a brilliant guy, his ideas were based on human reasoning, not divine revelation.
Right. He didn't have any special insight into what happens before birth or after death.
Yeah, none of us do, really.
Nope. So if we want to understand these things, we need to consult someone who does. And that's where Jesus comes in.
Yeah, he's presented as the second Adam, the Alpha and the Omega.
The one who is, who was, and who is to come.
The message says it so beautifully. Jesus is the only one who can talk about souls, bodies, and spirits with absolute authority, because he isn't limited by our earthly constraints.
His words are not speculation, they're truth.
And this leads to a really important takeaway. We need to be careful about adopting popular ideas that contradict what God has told us. Like the message uses the example of sinful desires.
Oh, right.
Just because we might be born with certain urges doesn't mean they were part of God's original design.
That's an important point. Sin came after creation.
Exactly.
It wasn't part of God's perfect plan.
So our inclinations towards things that are, called sin in the Bible are a result of the fall, not God's original intention.
Right. Ultimately, the message encourages us to recognize that we're limited in our understanding.
Yeah.
We need to approach these things with humility, seeking God's wisdom, instead of relying on our own reasoning or what's popular at the time.
So well said. As we wrap up this deep dive into Beyond the Twinkling Lights, it's clear that Jeremy's message is really about how little we understand about what happens after we die.
Yeah, we have limited perspective, limited experiences, limited capabilities.
Totally.
The message really encourages us to look beyond the surface, beyond the twinkling lights, to understand the deeper realities of faith in the afterlife.
And with that in mind, here's something for you to think about. What twinkling lights in your own life or in your beliefs might be keeping you from a deeper understanding?
It's something to ponder as you go about your day.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
And we'll see you next time on the Living HopeCast.